Relates to the question of democracy within your own country and on our continent more generally. Being at an institution of educational excellence, one of the core theses of democracy is that term limits are one of the key ingredients to ensuring that a democracy thrives. And that is a principle that is seen within the Constitutive Act of the African Union, for example. And yet, for all the progressive reforms that you've introduced economically, some of the, in my view, regressive reforms is to remove term limits for presidents in your country. Do you agree with the thesis? If so, why did you introduce the term limits? And in the same breath, what are you doing in cohort with your fellow African heads of state to ensure that more women get into positions of leadership, and ultimately the demographic gender bias that we see in our executives on the continent does not persist into the future?
Well, what you say, it all sounds nice, but it doesn't work like that. First thing, I did not remove term limits. I did not. And we don't have term limits. Term limits, I would say, frankly, that sounds sexy, but it ain't working. Because when you go into your second term, you no longer have any authority because people know that you're leaving. And your second term is a completely loss because it starts problems for your succession and people within your own party, and they start, fighting, and no one listens to you anymore. And we've discussed that, with various African leaders, and they all conclude to the same. Now, why is it still applied? It's because some African leaders think that, it's going to please you guys here. That's why they do it. But they really don't believe in it, because on the ground, they see the difficulty, And so I don't believe that, term limits, improve, democracy. I don't believe in that, and we've seen that, in many cases in Africa. That's not really. You need a certain time to apply your program, and that's not done, in a country where you have term limits. For instance, once you're elected, if you're completely new, the first 2 years are going to be kind of bumpy for you to apply, and start applying your policy. And then as you start implementing, you have to think of your re-election. And that means that if you have tough measures, to apply, you won't do that because you will be thinking of re-election because you have a 5-year term. So you will be campaigning for your re-election. Okay, you win, then you said, I'm going to. But then, no, people don't listen, they don't listen to you anymore because they know you're leaving office and you have a tough time. So in reality, in just 2 terms, you only have few years really where you can work. Now, it is also fair to say that in most European countries, there are no term limits. And you can't say that these countries are not democratic. So you see, term limits is not really linked to democracy. I know you're going to say, well, in America they have term limits. Okay, fine. For whom? Only the president. Some guys are in the Senate. They have been for 40 years. And you know that the power lies in the Senate in America. So why not apply then term limits to everyone? To every electoral office. That would be then fair, and not just the president. And actually, the guy when he was a president faces the toughest election. But he's the one, when you apply term limits to, but you don't to the others. You can be in parliament for 30, 40 years, no problem. Why? Why? If you you think that, we should really push the democracy, then it should also be applied, to parliament. Because someone who's been in parliament for 30 years, he's very powerful. He's a senior, member of the parliament with a lot of weight. So the same thing should be applied to him.